Welcome to my channel, where every story pulls you into a new mystery. Every case tests your instincts, and every clue brings us one step closer to the truth. In today's case, we follow Hercule Poirot as he unravels a puzzle that wasn't hidden in a letter, buried in evidence, or whispered by a witness. It was painted across the face of a minstrel who died mid-performance, his final smile frozen beneath a mask of color and deceit. Stay with me till the end, because the secret behind this painted smile isn't just tragic, it's brilliant. So, pour yourself a cup of tea and settle in, because today's case is worth every second until the why end. Chapter 1. The inciting incident. The sun had barely begun to dip below the horizon when the tragedy struck. At the luxurious Montrose estate, nestled amidst the rolling hills of the countryside, a grand banquet was underway. The opulent ballroom, adorned with glittering chandeliers and walls adorned with priceless paintings, was filled with the soft hum of aristocratic chatter. Guests, elegantly draped in satin and velvet, mingled with clinking glasses, exchanging pleasantries under the watchful gaze of a grand portrait, the painted minstrel, which had been the centerpiece of the estate for generations. Its enigmatic smile seemed to beckon the guests closer, as if inviting them into its timeless mystery. But this evening, the only mystery that would unfold was one of horror. As the evening wore on, a sudden commotion erupted in the gallery, followed by the sharp sound of breaking glass. Guests turned, their faces masked in confusion and disbelief, as they saw the body of Lord Archibald Drayton, the host of the evening, crumpled on the floor beneath the painting, a glint of steel protruding from his chest. The air shifted immediately from jubilance to stunned silence. "Lord Drayton!" cried Lady Evelyn, a distinguished widow with an unshakable poise, as she rushed to his side, her hand trembling as it hovered over his lifeless form. His once sharp features, now pale and slack, bore no sign of struggle. There was no sign of a struggle, no clue as to how the knife had found its mark. But one thing was certain: the killer was still among them. Within moments, the police were called, but the real detective had yet to arrive. Among the disoriented crowd, Hercule Poirot stood quietly, surveying the scene. His diminutive form, seemingly out of place amidst the towering figures of the guests, gave no hint of the sharp intellect that lay behind his well-groomed exterior. His eyes, dark and penetrating, examined every detail, from the broken glass at the feet of the deceased to the shocked faces of those closest to the body. He knew, even before stepping into the room, that the truth was hidden in plain sight, camouflaged by the very elegance of the estate itself. "Mon ami," he whispered softly to Captain Hastings, who stood at his side, perplexed as always by the flurry of activity around them. "Do you see it? The key to this puzzle is not in the man who lies dead, but in the one who stands untouched." Hastings, who had long been accustomed to Poirot's cryptic remarks, followed his gaze to the framed portrait of the painted minstrel. The image was that of a young man in mid-song, his face bright and joyous, framed by an ornate silver frame that glinted in the dim light. But it was more than the painting's simple charm that caught Hastings' attention. It was the subtle, almost imperceptible shift in the air, the whisper of something hidden. "Do you think," Hastings began, but Poirot held up a hand, his expression unwavering. "I think, mon ami, that we are dealing with a puzzle unlike any other. And like any puzzle, it will yield its secrets only when the pieces are placed in their proper order." Poirot turned back toward the gathering crowd, the guests, some now whispering amongst themselves, others frozen in a state of shock, were beginning to look toward the door, waiting for the arrival of the authorities. It would not be long now before the police would take charge, as they always did. But Poirot knew that if he were to solve this crime, he would need more than just the facts. He would need to understand the why, not just the how of it all. As the guests shuffled nervously, Poirot's eyes flickered briefly to the murder weapon, still lodged in Lord Drayton's chest. It was a fine dagger, its hilt adorned with intricate designs that seemed out of place amidst the sterile nature of a simple homicide. It felt wrong to deliberate, to personal. This is no ordinary crime, Poirot muttered to himself, his mind already piecing together the subtle clues. And the murderer, my friend, is not simply a shadow in the night. No, the murderer has been here all along, perhaps hidden in plain sight. With that, Hercule Poirot stepped forward into the fray, his small frame undaunted by the chaos swirling around him. In his mind, the puzzle was already taking shape, and with every step, he was one piece closer to unlocking the mystery that lay at the heart of Montrose estate. As the guests reluctantly parted to make way for Poirot, the faintest trace of a smile tugged at his lips. Tonight would be an evening to remember, not for the celebration, but for the revelation of a long-buried secret, a secret wrapped in the very layers of the painted minstrel's song. Chapter 2. The first room was heavy with a palpable tension. The guests, once so full of laughter and joy, now stood in clusters, their expressions a mixture of shock and curiosity. The air had shifted from celebratory to suffocating, as though the very walls of Montrose estate had tightened in the face of the murder. The sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway as the local constable arrived. His ruddy face flushed with the urgency of the moment, Poirot stood motionless, his eyes scanning the room, the once lavish banquet now a crime scene. He paid little attention to the police as they fumbled with their initial inquiries, and asked questions of the guests, questions they would ask repeatedly, but never truly answer. He had learned long ago that the most revealing details were often the ones left unspoken. Mon ami, Poirot whispered to Hastings, who had been dutifully taking in the unfolding scene. Look at the table by the window. Do you see the wine glasses? Hastings squinted in the direction Poirot indicated. There, at the far end of the room, near the large bay window that overlooked the manicured gardens, stood a small table with 2 empty glasses. There was something off about them. One of the glasses was still slick with condensation, the other overturned, its stem broken and splintered. It struck Hastings as odd, especially in the midst of such an elegant event. Do you think it's connected? Hastings asked, unsure. Poirot nodded slowly, his mind already weaving together possibilities. This is no accident, my friend. One glass is meant to be seen, the other discarded, but neither should be ignored. As Hastings took a step closer to inspect, Poirot moved quietly toward the body of Lord Drayton. The guests had stepped back, giving the authorities space to investigate. But Poirot's sharp eyes saw things others had missed. His gaze lingered on the body, taking in the details others overlooked. The knife, a fine ceremonial dagger, remained embedded in Drayton's chest, but it was the manner in which the body had fallen that interested Poirot most. Lord Drayton had fallen backward, his arms sprawled out at odd angles, as though he had not simply collapsed after being stabbed, but had been thrust forcefully to the ground. The angle of his fall seemed to deliberate, as if someone had ensured he would land with his body facing the portrait of the minstrel. It was almost as if the position of the body had been carefully staged. Poirot's eyes narrowed. The murder was calculated, not impulsive. He knelt beside the body, his gaze flicking to the bloodstains on the carpet. He observed the precise marks, noting their irregularities. The blood was fresh to fresh. He thought there was a slight shimmer of moisture that suggested the dagger had only just been removed. But the most intriguing detail was a small smudge, barely noticeable, at the base of the chair next to Lord Drayton's body. It was the faintest mark, a trail of something that could easily be overlooked. But Poirot knew better. He reached down and gently pressed his fingers into the carpet, tracing the line of the mark, feeling the delicate pattern. It is ink, he said quietly to himself. Ink, my friend. It seems Lord Drayton had not only a murderer, but also a secret he was trying to keep hidden. Poirot rose, his mind racing. You see, Hastings, what is hidden is never entirely gone. It merely waits for the right moment to be uncovered. Now we must uncover these secrets before they fade into obscurity, before Hastings could respond. A voice interrupted their quiet examination. Lady Evelyn, her face pale, approached with an air of composed desperation. Her hands clasped together nervously, and her eyes darted from the body to Poirot. "Excuse me, Monsieur Poirot," she began, her voice tinged with fear. "But have you discovered anything? The police are. Well, they seem at a loss." Poirot regarded her with a measured look, his expression inscrutable. Lady Evelyn had been among the closest to Lord Drayton, as she had been an invited guest. Though their relationship remained unspoken, it was a relationship Poirot would need to probe in time, but for now, he focused on her apparent agitation. "The police, madam, are merely following their leads," Poirot replied, his voice calm and reassuring. "But it is I who must uncover the truth. I do not seek answers from those who are quick to judge. No, the truth is buried beneath layers of deception, and I intend to find it." Lady Evelyn's gaze flickered nervously, her lips parting as if she might say more, but the words died before they reached her mouth. She looked briefly at the broken wine glasses, and Poirot noticed the faintest tremor in her hand as she clasped it to her side. Poirot's eyes lingered on her for a moment longer, but he offered no further comment. Instead, he turned toward the other guests, who were still congregating in small groups, whispering to one another in low tones. He noticed a few faces: Jasper Wren, the well-dressed financier with the thin, calculating smile, and Miss Vivian Frost, a noted artist known for her sharp wit and sharp tongue, who had been speaking to Lord Drayton only moments before his death. Both were now in the thick of the confusion, avoiding the body as though it might come to life. Poirot's mind was already formulating theories, but he knew better than to rush. There was more here than met the eye, things hidden beneath layers of society's false politeness, masked by smiles and pleasantries, and soon he would peel those layers away. He motioned for Hastings to follow him toward the table with the glasses. As they approached, Poirot's eyes did not stray from the scene. He noted every subtle shift, the way the guests avoided looking at the body, the way they hesitated to speak. The pieces were beginning to come together, slowly but surely, and soon Poirot would see the full picture. But for now, he allowed the silence to settle, giving him the clarity needed to understand the first of many clues in this intricate puzzle. Chapter 3: The Gathering of Suspects. The atmosphere in the Montrose estate grew increasingly charged. As the guests gathered in the grand salon, the police were busy cordoning off areas, directing people to take their seats. But Poirot knew this was no place for the law to work its magic. It would take a mind as sharp as his to peel away the facade of civility that masked the guilty hearts within the room. As Poirot stepped away from the crime scene and toward the salon, his sharp eyes flickered over the faces of the assembled guests. Each of them had a story, a hidden motive, and in Poirot's experience, one of them held the key to unraveling the mystery. Lady Evelyn, still standing near the broken wine glasses, made an attempt to compose herself, but Poirot could sense the subtle tremor in her hands. She was trying too hard to appear unaffected. This was a woman with secrets, whether to protect herself or someone else. Poirot could not yet tell. He gave her a slight nod of acknowledgement as he passed, his gaze then moving to the next person in line. It was Jasper Wren, the financier, a man whose polished exterior hid a calculating mind, one who could navigate high society with ease, but struggled to mask the inner tension that stirred beneath the surface. Poirot had already noted that Wren was among the first to express his condolences to Lady Evelyn. After Lord Drayton's death, his voice steady but lacking true sorrow. A man who grieves so publicly, Poirot thought, is often the most adept at hiding his true feelings. Then there was Miss Vivian Frost, the artist, who had been engaged in conversation with Lord Drayton before the murder. She was visibly shaken, her normally confident demeanor now replaced by a quiet, almost nervous energy. Poirot had observed her earlier. She avoided eye contact with him, as though she had something to hide. Her reputation for being outspoken and sharp-tongued only added to the intrigue. How could such a woman remain so calm in the face of death? Poirot's thoughts were interrupted as Captain Hastings, ever the loyal companion, approached with a concerned look on his face. "Poirot, I've just spoken with the police. They're already forming their conclusions," Hastings said, his voice laced with frustration. "They suspect it was a robbery gone wrong. But I see you have a different theory." Poirot gave Hastings a knowing glance. "My friend, the police are quick to judge, but quick judgments never lead to truth. They are looking for a clear answer, one that fits their expectations. But life, as we know, does not work that way." Hastings nodded, sensing the familiar tension between Poirot and the authorities. He trusted Poirot's methods, even if they often took time to unfold. The Belgian detective was never content with surface-level answers, always digging deeper. The gathering of suspects was now complete. Poirot had positioned himself at the center of the room, a careful distance from each guest. He watched as they took their seats, exchanging uneasy glances, the murmur of whispered conversations floating through the air. "Lady Evelyn," Poirot began, his voice cutting through the tension like a scalpel, "might I ask you to sit beside me?" Lady Evelyn hesitated for a moment before complying, her heels clicking sharply against the floor as she moved to take a seat next to Poirot. He could tell she was trying to maintain her composure, but there was something brittle in her movements, as though she feared breaking at any moment. Poirot's gaze shifted to the others. "And you, Monsieur Wren, will you join us?" he asked, his tone polite but firm. Wren glanced at Poirot, then at Lady Evelyn, before nodding and taking a seat on the opposite side of the table. Miss Frost followed suit, sitting across from Lady Evelyn. Though she avoided looking at either of them for too long, Poirot allowed a beat of silence to settle before he spoke again, his words deliberate, each one carefully chosen. "I trust you are all aware of the gravity of this situation," he said, his eyes flickering across the faces of the gathered suspects. "Lord Drayton is dead, and it is not the time for false assurances or attempts to shield the truth. We must face the facts." There was a moment of stillness as the words sank in. Poirot could see the subtle shift in the room, the way the suspects tightened their grips on their chairs or shifted their posture as if bracing for what was to come. "The police," Poirot continued, "have their own theories, as you may know. They will look for the most obvious explanations: an argument gone awry, a robbery turned violent. But I ask you to consider something else. Consider that the crime we are dealing with here is not born of impulse, but of intention. A carefully crafted act, a deliberate orchestration. Lord Drayton's death was no accident." The room fell silent. Each suspect seemed to hold their breath, as if expecting the weight of Poirot's words to crush them. But Poirot did not reveal any more for now. He wanted them to feel the heat of his scrutiny, to understand that they were under examination. Lady Evelyn spoke first, her voice shaky but steady. "Monsieur Poirot, what do you mean? You're suggesting one of you is responsible for Lord Drayton's death, madam." Poirot interrupted gently, his gaze unwavering. "But which one? That is what I am here to discover. The truth lies not in the actions we see, but in the ones we do not." Jasper Wren leaned forward slightly, his eyes narrowing as he addressed Poirot. "Are you suggesting we are all suspects?" Poirot nodded. "Indeed, Monsieur Wren. Every one of you had access to Lord Drayton. Every one of you has a motive, whether it be financial gain, a hidden grudge, or something more personal. There is a thread that binds you all to this crime. I intend to find it." Vivian Frost's voice broke through the tension. "But surely you don't think any of us could have done this?" She laughed softly, though the sound was laced with nervousness. "We're all too well acquainted with Lord Drayton. It's impossible." "Ah, Miss Frost," Poirot said, his eyes glinting with quiet amusement. "That is the very mistake you make, thinking that familiarity breeds safety. The closer one is to another, the more dangerous their motives can become. We will see, will we not, what these relationships truly conceal." For a moment, the silence in the room felt suffocating. Poirot could feel the weight of their eyes upon him, each of them aware that he was beginning to dissect their lives, piece by piece. He allowed the pause to linger, letting the air grow thick with anticipation before he spoke again. "The game has begun," he said softly, "and soon the truth will be revealed. But for now we wait." As the seconds ticked by, the tension remained, thickening with each passing moment. Poirot had no intention of revealing his hand just yet. He was merely laying the foundation. The game, after all, had only just begun. Chapter 4. Poirot Arrivas. Tension in the room was palpable. Lady Evelyn, Jasper Wren, and Miss Vivian Frost sat before Poirot, the weight of their suspicion pressing down upon them like a suffocating fog. They sat rigidly, their eyes darting between each other, trying to gauge who among them was the most likely to crack. The silence that followed Poirot's calculated words was thick, charged with an undercurrent of anxiety. Poirot, however, appeared completely unfazed by the oppressive atmosphere. He leaned back in his chair, the tips of his fingers delicately pressed together in a gesture of contemplation. His sharp eyes, though, never left the three suspects, silently cataloging every slight movement, every flicker of emotion that passed across their faces. "Please, do not think I do not recognize your discomfort," Poirot began, breaking the silence. "You are uneasy, are you not? Each of you. And that, my friends, is a good thing." He allowed his words to settle in the air like a weight. Lady Evelyn shifted uncomfortably in her chair, though she did her best to maintain a composed exterior. Jasper Wren, for his part, leaned forward slightly, his hands folded tightly in front of him, as though he were trying to hold himself together. Miss Frost, on the other hand, was slightly more withdrawn, her eyes flitting from one suspect to the other before quickly returning to the floor, clearly not ready to meet Poirot's intense gaze. "But I digress," Poirot continued, his voice smooth and unhurried. "The truth does not lie in the obvious, as the police would have you believe. They are focused on the wrong things, looking for motives where there are none, and missing the subtleties that would lead them straight to the truth. But I am not the police, my friends. I am a man who reads the smallest of details, who examines the psychology of a person's every move. And it is that psychology which will lead us to the heart of this puzzle." At his words, a collective breath seemed to escape the trio. They had been hoping for some direction, some clarity, but Poirot was not in the mood to give it away just yet. Instead, he observed them carefully, deliberately, methodically, his eyes cutting through them like a surgeon's scalpel. "You, Lady Evelyn," Poirot began, his gaze turning toward her, "are an interesting case. You have the bearing of someone who has seen much in her time, yet you wear the mask of a woman who has never truly known grief. You are too composed, my dear, too perfect. This perfection is often a sign of something far more disturbing beneath the surface. Tell me, madam, what was the nature of your relationship with Lord Drayton?" Lady Evelyn froze, her face betraying no emotion, but Poirot's words had struck a nerve. She shifted her gaze toward the portrait of the painted minstrel, as though seeking solace in its timeless gaze. "I was his friend," she said, her voice controlled, but there was a slight tremor beneath the surface. "Nothing more, Monsieur Poirot." "Ah, yes," Poirot replied, his voice soft but probing. "Friends. Of course, but friends are not the ones who weep at funerals. No, madam, it is the lovers who shed tears. It is the lovers who conceal their emotions behind cold eyes and stiff spines. It is you, Lady Evelyn, who hides something, a motive perhaps. A motive deeper than you might care to admit. Lady Evelyn remained silent, her lips tight, but the tension in her eyes spoke volumes. Poirot, however, did not press further. Not yet. Turning to Wren, Poirot continued, "And you, Monsieur Wren, you are a man who speaks in numbers, in profits, and in losses. But what about feelings? What about loyalty? How do you measure these things?" Wren gave a small, tight smile, but it did not reach his eyes. "Feelings have no place in business, Poirot," he replied coolly. "I deal in facts and figures. Lord Drayton was a business partner. Nothing more. What happened to him is unfortunate, but we must move on." "Move on," Poirot repeated, his voice thick with irony. "Ah, yes, moving on is so much easier when you have no attachments. Tell me, Monsieur Wren, what exactly did you lose in this unfortunate event? Your business dealings? Your reputation?" Wren's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, refusing to meet Poirot's gaze. The tension between them was palpable, but Poirot did not press him further. Sensing that Wren's walls were not yet ready to crumble, Poirot's attention then shifted to Miss Frost, who had been unusually quiet since he began his questioning. She had been watching him intently, her eyes filled with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. "Miss Frost," Poirot said, his voice softer yet no less penetrating, "you, I think, are the most interesting of all. You hide behind your art and your wit, but I see through you. You have a way of deflecting attention, a way of wrapping your emotions in layers of irony. You can talk circles around people, but what of your own feelings? What do you hide behind that sharp tongue?" Miss Frost looked up sharply, meeting Poirot's eyes for the first time. Her lips curled into a sardonic smile. "I do not hide anything, Monsieur Poirot," she said coolly. "What you see is what you get." Poirot raised an eyebrow, unconvinced. "Ah, but that is the problem, Miss Frost. What you show the world is only the surface. Beneath it, there is something far darker, something you do not wish to confront." Miss Frost flinched, the briefest flicker of vulnerability crossing her face. She quickly masked it with her usual sharp demeanor, but Poirot had seen enough. There was more to Miss Frost than met the eye, and the layers of her personality were beginning to unravel. Poirot stood up slowly, surveying the room once more. "You see," he said, his voice calm but full of authority, "the truth lies within each of you. It is hidden, yes, but it is there, and it will not be long before I uncover it. But remember this, the more you try to hide it, the closer I get to it." As he spoke, the guests shifted uneasily in their seats, each of them aware that Poirot's gaze was closing in on them. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, and soon the truth would be revealed. Poirot turned away, his mind already racing ahead, piecing together the clues that were hidden just beneath the surface. "We are only at the beginning," he murmured to himself, "but it is already clear one of you will soon reveal your true face. And when that happens, the mystery will be over." And so, the investigation continued. But Poirot's next steps were already set in motion. The game was far from over, and soon, all the secrets would be laid bare. Chapter 5. Initial interviews begin. The room, still heavy with the presence of Lord Drayton's death, seemed to grow smaller as Poirot moved toward the group of suspects. Lady Evelyn, Jasper Wren, and Miss Vivian Frost each appeared to retreat inwardly, as though the very air of the room pressed against them. The subtle undercurrent of tension, however, did not escape Poirot. It was the tiniest shift of body language, a flicker of an eye, a shallow breath, that revealed the most. Poirot, never one to rush, took his time before speaking. His gaze swept over each of them, lingering on Lady Evelyn for a fraction longer. She was the first to break the silence, her voice wavering only slightly. "Poirot, I am sure you must have your own theories by now," she began. her hand smoothing the fabric of her dress nervously. "But we, the guests, had no part in Lord Drayton's death. I assure you of that." Poirot observed her with an air of calm patience. "Ah, madam, I have no doubt you are telling me what you believe to be true. But you must understand, the truth does not lie in what you say, but in what you withhold." Lady Evelyn's eyes tightened, but she remained silent, unwilling to reveal more. Poirot, however, was not discouraged. Instead, he turned to Wren, who had been sitting rigidly at the edge of his seat, his gaze firmly fixed on the floor. "Monsieur Wren," Poirot began, his voice smooth but firm, "you claim that your dealings with Lord Drayton were purely business. But tell me, what does business mean to you? Surely you did not know him solely as a colleague, did you?" Wren's lips twitched, but he did not look up. "I did not know him as you seem to imply," he replied quickly, his voice cold. "Lord Drayton and I shared a business arrangement, nothing more." "Ah, business," Poirot said thoughtfully, his gaze unwavering. "But in business, Monsieur Wren, there are always alliances and rivalries, are there not? You speak of nothing personal, but is it not true that all partnerships carry more than just professional interest? One must trust, one must share secrets." Poirot's tone became more probing. "And what if trust breaks down?" Wren's jaw clenched at the mention of trust, but he did not respond. The silence stretched, but Poirot made no move to fill it. Instead, he turned his attention to Miss Frost. Her expression had remained guarded throughout the conversation, her arms folded across her chest, an aura of distance radiating from her. "Miss Frost," Poirot said, his voice soft but penetrating, "you are an artist, and surely you understand the language of symbols. You spoke with Lord Drayton only hours before his death. What did you discuss? Was it simply a matter of business, as you claim?" Vivian Frost's lips pressed into a thin line, her gaze flickering momentarily toward Lady Evelyn before returning to Poirot. "I told you already," she said, her voice steady, though a little too steady. "We spoke of exhibitions and future projects. Nothing more." Poirot did not let her off so easily. "Nothing more," he repeated slowly. "And yet you were so animated, Miss Frost. You were not speaking of mere exhibitions, were you? The way you spoke, the way he listened so intently. There was more there, surely. A passion, a hidden emotion." Frost stiffened, her eyes narrowing as she glared at Poirot. "I do not know what you mean, Monsieur Poirot. You are drawing conclusions that are not there." Poirot smiled softly, his eyes twinkling with quiet amusement. "Perhaps, or perhaps, Miss Frost, you are the one who is hiding something beneath that cool exterior." The silence that followed was heavy, thick with unspoken thoughts. Lady Evelyn shifted in her seat, as if uneasy with the direction the conversation was taking. But Poirot's sharp gaze had already moved on, glancing at each suspect in turn. It was a subtle movement, but he had seen enough. "Tell me, madam," Poirot said, turning back to Lady Evelyn, "how did Lord Drayton appear in the days leading up to his death? Did he act as though he knew something would happen?" Lady Evelyn's face tightened, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. He was his usual self," she replied quickly, her voice faltering slightly. "There was nothing unusual about him. He had no premonition, if that's what you're implying." Poirot's lips curled into a small, knowing smile. "No premonition," he echoed softly. "And yet, madam, you know him better than anyone. There's always something that is left unsaid, some unspoken connection. What was it between the two of you that you remained so distant from the truth?" Lady Evelyn's expression flickered for just a moment before she stiffened, her shoulders set in a defensive posture. She said nothing, but her silence spoke volumes. Poirot had learned long ago that silence often carried more weight than words. "Very well," Poirot continued, stepping away from the table and pacing slowly across the room. "I will not press further for now, but understand this. My friends, one of you holds the key to this mystery. And while you sit here in your comfortable little bubble of denial, you reveal more than you think." Poirot's words lingered in the air, leaving a tense hush in their wake. The suspects shifted in their seats once more, their discomfort now unmistakable. They were beginning to realize that Poirot was not here merely to ask questions. He was here to unearth the truth, and he would not be swayed. Poirot turned back toward the door, his eyes never leaving the group. "I shall return soon," he said softly. "But when I do, you will have no more room to hide. Your secrets will be exposed, one by one." As Poirot exited the room, his mind was already turning, analyzing the words spoken and the silences kept. The game was far from over, but every puzzle, no matter how intricate, always had a solution, and Poirot was already on his way to finding it. Chapter 6. First false lead there in the Montrose estate had grown increasingly thick. Like a storm about to break, Poirot moved through the rooms with measured steps, his mind teeming with thoughts and impressions, each more perplexing than the last. He could hear the low murmur of the police officers discussing their own findings, but their conclusions seemed irrelevant. They were chasing after shadows, and Poirot had long since learned that shadows rarely offered any substance. His focus was elsewhere, on the small details that no one else seemed to notice. Later that afternoon, Poirot was sitting in the study, reviewing his notes, when Captain Hastings entered the room. The captain's face, normally composed, was taut with frustration. "Poirot," Hastings began, his voice tight, "I spoke with the constable in charge of the case. He insists the situation is clear. The motive, he says, is clear-cut: Drayton's recent business troubles. Apparently, there was an argument about the estate's financial dealings just days before his death. They've got to suspect one of Drayton's employees, a man by the name of Gregory Harper." Poirot raised an eyebrow but remained silent, allowing Hastings to continue. "The man had a motive, it seems," Hastings went on. "He was caught leaving the estate grounds around the time of the murder. His story is shaky at best, and they're convinced he did it. The police are about to arrest him." Poirot leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping a slow rhythm against the desk. "Ah, Gregory Harper," he murmured. "A man with a clear motive, yes, but does that make him the killer?" "I think not, mon ami. A motive is never enough. If you only seek the obvious, you will always miss the truth." Hastings shifted uneasily. "But the evidence," Poirot held up a hand, silencing his friend. "The evidence is always subject to interpretation, Hastings. And the interpretation of the police is far too narrow. No, this Harper, this man, is merely a red herring. He is the answer that satisfies the mind, but not the truth." Hastings stared at him for a moment, then nodded reluctantly. "You think the police are wrong, then?" "I know they are wrong," Poirot replied with certainty. "They are distracted by the surface of things, by the fact that Harper was in the vicinity. But in my experience, such facts are rarely as they seem." Poirot's words had a ring of finality to them, but the unease in Hastings' eyes was hard to ignore. "So what's the next step, Poirot?" Hastings asked, his voice tinged with both concern and curiosity. Poirot stood, a small smile forming on his lips. "The next step, mon ami, is to revisit the suspects. I will ask them different questions, ones they will not expect. The answers they give will reveal the cracks in their stories. We must be patient, Hastings. In time, the truth will emerge." The evening was falling when Poirot returned to the salon, where Lady Evelyn, Jasper Wren, and Miss Frost were still waiting, their faces a mix of tension and uncertainty. The weight of Poirot's last words seemed to have lingered in the room, the silence pressing in on them like an invisible hand. Poirot wasted no time in addressing them. "I have heard the news from the police, my friends," he said calmly. "They have their suspect, and they believe the case to be solved. Gregory Harper, an employee of Lord Drayton, has been arrested. His alibi is weak, and the police believe that he had a clear motive, a business dispute with Drayton. That could have led to murder. The suspects exchanged glances, but none spoke. Poirot continued, his voice unwavering. However, I am not convinced. I do not believe Harper is the killer. No, the true murderer remains in this room, hidden in plain sight. Lady Evelyn's lips tightened at Poirot's words, but she said nothing. Wren sat perfectly still, his eyes narrowed in thought, while Miss Frost seemed to have withdrawn into herself. Her arms crossed tightly across her chest. Do you understand what I am saying? Poirot pressed, his voice gaining strength. The police have a suspect, but they are wrong. And so, I must ask you once again, what is the truth? What have you concealed? The real killer is among you, and I will expose them. Lady Evelyn met Poirot's gaze with an intensity that betrayed no fear, only calculation. Monsieur Poirot, she said slowly, you may be correct. But if Harper did not kill Lord Drayton, then who did? You have accused all of us. What more do you want from us? Poirot studied her, his eyes piercing. I want nothing more than the truth, madam. But you must understand, the truth is not something we can force. It must be uncovered, piece by piece, until it fits. And when it does, we will know. Wren shifted uncomfortably, but his voice remained steady. If it's not Harper, then who do you think it is, Poirot? You must have some idea. Poirot smiled faintly. I have no idea yet, Monsieur Wren, but the truth will come, and I shall know it when it does. He turned his gaze back to Miss Frost, who had been unnervingly quiet throughout the conversation. And you, Miss Frost, he asked, his voice soft but direct. What do you know? What have you kept hidden from me? Her eyes flickered, but she remained silent. Poirot stood in front of them, his sharp eyes taking in every small movement, every subtle shift in body language. The silence grew heavier, and Poirot let it linger for a moment longer, allowing the pressure to build. I will return tomorrow, he said finally, his voice calm and composed. And when I do, we shall see what you are truly hiding. Until then, think carefully about your answers. The truth is closer than you think. With that, Poirot turned and walked out of the room, his mind already working through the puzzle, piece by piece. The false lead had been presented, but Poirot was certain that the real killer was still in his sights. It was only a matter of time before the web of deception unraveled. Chapter 7. The psychological gamut following day brought with it a heavy stillness. The guests of Montrose estate had been confined to their quarters, the air around them thick with unease and suspicion. Poirot, having spent the morning reviewing his notes, arrived at the estate in the late afternoon. His mind, always sharp and unyielding, had been piecing together the fragments of the puzzle. And yet, the pieces, though scattered, refused to fit together neatly. Poirot entered the salon where Lady Evelyn, Jasper Wren, and Miss Vivian Frost had gathered once again. Their faces were tense, their movements constrained by the knowledge that Poirot's questions were about to begin anew. The atmosphere in the room was charged, each of them aware of the game they were now playing, but none willing to admit that they were already caught in its web. Poirot's entrance was quiet but commanding. Without a word, he motioned for them to sit, and they obeyed, albeit reluctantly. The tension was palpable, and Poirot relished it. He knew that beneath their calm exteriors, they were all beginning to feel the weight of the questions he was about to ask. Lady Evelyn's lips tightened as Poirot looked at her, his gaze steady and unblinking. Madam, he began, his voice smooth but firm, we have danced around the truth long enough, have we not? You, like the others, have your secrets. It is time to share them, to expose them for what they are. Lady Evelyn's eyes flickered for the briefest of moments, a subtle hint of fear or perhaps frustration, but it quickly vanished behind the mask she had so carefully constructed. I have already told you everything you need to know, Poirot. There's nothing more for me to reveal, Poirot's lips curled into a slight, knowing smile. "Ah, but that is where you are mistaken, madam. You have told me what you think I need to know. But I am not interested in your version of the truth. I am interested in the real truth, the one that lies beneath the surface." Lady Evelyn held his gaze, but there was a slight tremor in her fingers as she gripped the edge of her chair. Poirot's eyes never left her, reading her every movement, every subtle shift of emotion. "I have no more to say, Monsieur Poirot," she insisted, her voice barely above a whisper. Poirot nodded thoughtfully, then turned his attention to Wren. The financier had been unusually quiet, his normally sharp features drawn tight with concern. His posture was rigid, almost defensive. Poirot's gaze lingered on him for a moment before speaking. "Monsieur Wren," Poirot said, his voice dripping with subtle insinuation, "you are a man who thrives on control, are you not? A man who does not let anything slip, who remains in command of every situation." Wren's eyes narrowed slightly, but he said nothing. "Control, Monsieur Wren, is an illusion," Poirot continued, his voice growing softer, "one that you hold dearly, but one that, in the end, is broken by the truth. Tell me, what is it you have been hiding from me? What part of your story is not as it seems?" Wren's fingers twitched at his side, but he remained silent, staring straight ahead. Poirot pressed further, his words calculated and deliberate. "You see, Monsieur Wren, your silence speaks volumes. You know something that you are unwilling to share. Perhaps you fear the consequences of your own actions. Or perhaps you are simply playing the game, hoping that I will not notice the small details that betray you." Still, Wren did not respond. Poirot allowed the silence to hang in the air, but then shifted his gaze to Miss Frost. She had been watching Poirot closely, her eyes sharp with an intensity that mirrored his own. Unlike the others, Miss Frost had not been rattled by the questioning. She sat with a quiet defiance, her posture still and poised. "Miss Frost," Poirot said, his voice now warm, almost friendly, "you are an artist, yes? A woman who understands the intricacies of the human form, of human emotion. But what about the art of deception? Are you not skilled in that as well?" Frost's lips curled into a slight smile, but her eyes betrayed her unease. "I am an artist, Monsieur Poirot, and I know what I see. But I do not lie. You may think that I am hiding something, but I assure you I am not." Poirot's eyes glimmered with quiet amusement. "But Miss Frost, art is about layers, is it not? Layers of meaning, layers of expression, layers of truth. What you see on the surface is rarely all there is to see. What lies beneath? That is the question." Miss Frost stiffened, but Poirot did not miss the way her hands gripped the armrests of her chair, the tension in her body. "You speak of art," Poirot continued, his voice calm but unwavering. "But what of the artist? What of the emotions you choose to conceal, the things you choose to ignore? Is it not the artist who is most skilled at hiding the truth, even from themselves?" Frost shifted uncomfortably in her seat, but she remained silent. Poirot allowed a beat of silence before he spoke again, his voice low and soft, yet insistent. "One of you is lying to me," he said. "One of you is hiding something, and it will be uncovered soon enough. The truth is like a painting at first. It appears simple, but when you look closer, you see the layers, the shadows, the hidden details that make it complete." He leaned forward, his eyes locked on each of them in turn. "Soon I will have all the pieces, and the truth will be revealed." With that, Poirot stood, his gaze sweeping across the room. The psychological game had begun in earnest, and he would not rest until it was over. Chapter 8. A secondary mystery evening wore on. The tension in the Montrose estate building like the still air before a storm. Poirot had taken his leave from the salon, but the rest of the guests remained, their minds churning with the conversation they had just endured. Lady Evelyn, Jasper Wren, and Miss Vivian Frost each sat in their respective corners, the silence between them growing heavier with every passing minute. Poirot's sharp eyes had left none of their reactions unnoticed. Lady Evelyn's inability to sit still, Wren's repeated glances toward the door, Frost's stiffening posture. Each of these moments spoke volumes, but the detective knew he needed more than mere impressions to get to the heart of the matter. The pieces had begun to shift, but they had not yet locked into place. Poirot was well aware of the need for subtlety in his approach. The questioning had created a crack in the perfect image of the guests, but it was only the beginning. For now, Poirot knew he had to tread carefully, like a spider weaving its web, inch by inch, until all his suspects were caught. As the night deepened, Poirot returned to his room, where he carefully reviewed his notes and thoughts. The killer, he was certain, was within the group of guests. Of that there was no doubt. But which one? Each person had a story, a motive, but Poirot knew better than to trust mere assumptions. He needed something concrete, something that would tie one of them unmistakably to the crime. His thoughts were interrupted by a sudden noise from outside his door. The faint sound of footsteps, followed by the soft knock that came a moment later, reached Poirot's ears. He rose from his chair, a hint of curiosity flickering in his expression. He opened the door to reveal Captain Hastings, his face unusually pale. "Poirot," Hastings began, his voice low, "there's been another incident. You need to see this." Poirot's brow furrowed slightly, and he followed Hastings out into the hallway, his mind racing with possibilities. Another incident? Could it be the same murder at work? He had suspected that there was more at play than the murder of Lord Drayton. There were deeper currents running beneath the surface of this case. Hastings led Poirot to a small side room, where the estate's staff had gathered. In the center of the room, a faint smell of something burnt hung in the air. Poirot's eyes immediately went to the desk, where a small, delicate paper fan lay in the center of the room, its edges singed. "Someone attempted to set this room on fire," Hastings said grimly, pointing at the scorch marks near the window. "We don't know who or why, but the fire was quickly extinguished. The staff managed to contain it before any major damage was done." Poirot stepped closer, examining the fan and the surrounding area carefully. The fire, though contained, had left its mark, but there was something peculiar about the fan itself. The intricate designs on its surface, the faint hint of a name written along the edge. Poirot ran his fingers over the edges of the fan, inspecting every detail. "It appears to have been intended to destroy something," Poirot muttered, his mind working through the possibilities. Perhaps a letter, a document, or something more personal. He glanced at Hastings. This fire was no accident. Someone wanted to erase something that might have been important to Lord Drayton, or someone connected to him. Hastings nodded, but Poirot could see the confusion in his expression. But what was it? And why the fan? Poirot turned the fan over, his sharp eyes catching the faintest impression on the back. "Look here," Poirot said, pointing to a smudge of ink, barely visible against the paper. "It is faint, but it is there. This fan, it seems, was in the possession of someone close to Drayton." He studied the fan for a moment longer before turning back to Hastings. "This fire, mon ami, is not unrelated to the murder. It is part of the same puzzle. Someone is trying to hide something, perhaps a letter, perhaps a clue, something that would reveal the true nature of Drayton's death." Poirot paused, his gaze lingering on the fan. His mind raced through the events of the past day, trying to make sense of this new development. The attempt to destroy evidence was clearly deliberate, but the question remained: what was the connection between the fan and the murder? Hastings, standing nearby, seemed to read Poirot's thoughts. "You think the fan has something to do with the murderer?" he asked cautiously. Poirot nodded slowly. "I am certain of it, but this is only one piece of the puzzle. We must find out who had access to this fan, who might have been involved in its destruction." Poirot's gaze narrowed as he took one last look at the fan. "This fan," he muttered, "is a key. And whoever tried to destroy it is the one who holds the answers." The realization settled in Poirot's mind. This was no ordinary case. It was a game of hide and seek, one that required a delicate touch and a keen eye for detail. The murderer, he now knew, was not just hiding in plain sight. They were carefully concealing every step they took. And Poirot, the master of deduction, was determined to uncover every secret they wished to keep buried. "Let us return to the suspects," Poirot said, his tone decisive. "There's more to this mystery than we have yet uncovered, and I intend to find every last piece." Chapter 9. Hidden Connections. Poirot's mind was alive with questions. As he made his way back to the salon, the fan still in his hand, the evidence was stacking up, but none of the pieces seemed to fit perfectly into place. The fire, the attempted destruction of evidence. There was something deliberate in the actions of the person, trying to hide something, but what was it they feared would be uncovered? As Poirot entered the salon, he saw the three suspects sitting in their respective places, all of them looking as though they were waiting for the inevitable. Lady Evelyn had regained her composure, but the slight tension in her hands gave away the nervousness that continued to plague her. Wren, though outwardly composed, was avoiding Poirot's gaze, his fingers tapping against the armrest of his chair in a subtle, anxious rhythm. Miss Frost was the most controlled of the three, her eyes sharp and alert, but Poirot could see the flicker of uncertainty hiding just beneath her cool exterior. "Ah, Ms. Amos," Poirot began, his voice calm, but with an unmistakable edge of authority. "We have reached an interesting juncture, have we not? I have seen things, heard things, that lead me to believe this case is more than just a simple matter of murder." He paused, his eyes sweeping over the guests, studying their reactions. Wren shifted in his seat, Miss Frost narrowed her eyes slightly, and Lady Evelyn's lips tightened imperceptibly. Poirot made a mental note of their reactions before continuing. "Yes, it is clear to me that the events surrounding Lord Drayton's death are no coincidence. The fire, the fan that was meant to be destroyed, it all points to something deeper, something much darker." He let the words hang in the air for a moment, allowing the suspects to absorb the weight of his statement. Poirot then took a step forward, his gaze settling on Lady Evelyn. "Madam," he said softly, "you and Lord Drayton were quite close, were you not? It seems to me that your relationship with him was more than simply social. There were personal connections at play, connections that I suspect you are not ready to reveal." Lady Evelyn stiffened, her eyes meeting Poirot's with a guarded expression. "I have told you everything, Monsieur Poirot. Lord Drayton and I were close, but it was no secret. There was nothing hidden between us." Poirot did not relent. "Ah, but there is always something hidden, madam. Something that remains beneath the surface, buried for the sake of appearances. I wonder, what is it that Lord Drayton knew about you? What secret could he have held? One that would lead someone to want to erase it." Lady Evelyn's breath caught, and for a brief moment, Poirot saw a flicker of something, fear or guilt, pass through her eyes. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. Poirot turned to Wren. "And you, Monsieur Wren," he said, his tone shifting slightly. "You, too, had a close relationship with Drayton. A business relationship, you say, but I wonder, was there something more? A connection between the two of you that you are not willing to admit?" Wren glanced up at Poirot, but the calculated composure in his eyes was evident. "There was nothing more than what I've already told you. Drayton and I worked together, and that's all there was to it." Poirot studied him for a moment, noting the slight rigidity in Wren's posture. "I think you are being less forthcoming, Monsieur Wren. Your motives may not be as simple as business, are they?" Wren's lips tightened, but he said nothing. Poirot finally turned his gaze to Miss Frost, whose face had remained mostly neutral, though there was a slight twitch in her fingers as she fidgeted with the hem of her sleeve. "And you, Miss Frost," Poirot said, his voice soft but penetrating. "You were not as close to Drayton as the others, but you knew him well enough. But it is not your professional connection with him that interests me. No, it is your connection to something else entirely." Miss Frost raised an eyebrow, her lips curling into a smile that did not quite reach her eyes. "What do you mean, Monsieur Poirot?" "I have told you everything I know." "Ah, but that is where you are mistaken, Miss Frost," Poirot said with a slight tilt of his head. "You have not told me everything. You have told me what you want me to hear. But what about the things you haven't said? What about the motives you've hidden behind your art, behind the persona you present to the world?" Frost's expression faltered for a moment before she regained control. "I don't know what you're implying, Poirot." Poirot studied her for a moment longer, his mind racing through the possibilities. "I think you do. There are things about you, about your past, that you have not revealed. And those things may be the key to understanding why Drayton is dead." The room was silent as Poirot's words settled over them. Lady Evelyn, Wren, and Miss Frost exchanged glances, the tension palpable. Poirot could feel the weight of their secrets pressing in on him, but he also felt the growing certainty that he was on the right path. There was a connection between them, something deeper than mere business or personal relationships. But what was it? Poirot stood up, his eyes never leaving the suspects. "I shall leave you to ponder your words," he said, his voice calm but firm. "But remember, the truth cannot remain hidden forever. It is only a matter of time before it is revealed." With that, he turned and walked toward the door, leaving the three guests to their thoughts. The connections were there, hidden beneath layers of deception, and Poirot was determined to uncover them one by one. Chapter 10. Poirot's secret clue. Poirot paced slowly through the dimly lit study of Montrose estate, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts. The suspects, Lady Evelyn, Jasper Wren, and Miss Vivian Frost, had become more than mere players in his investigation. They had become pieces of a much larger puzzle, one that was beginning to reveal the faintest traces of its true shape. He had gathered much information, but the pieces had yet to fit together in a coherent picture. Each of them held a part of the truth, but none seemed ready to release it. The fire, the fan, the carefully concealed secrets, all of these were indications of a greater story waiting to be told. But who had the courage to speak, and who would remain silent, hoping their lies would remain buried? Poirot paused in front of the large window overlooking the estate's gardens. The moonlight bathed the grounds in a ghostly glow, and for a moment, Poirot allowed himself to feel the weight of the mystery pressing in on him. But he could not afford to lose focus now. The truth was near, and it was only a matter of time before he would find it. The sound of a quiet knock at the door pulled Poirot from his thoughts. He turned, expecting it to be Hastings, and was not disappointed. His friend entered, his usual optimism now tinged with concern. "Poirot," Hastings began, his voice laced with urgency, "there's something you need to see." Poirot raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What is it, mon ami?" Hastings hesitated for a moment, his eyes darting nervously. "It's about the fan, the one from the fire. We found something that could change everything." Poirot's pulse quickened. He had known that the fan was significant, but now Hastings was suggesting that it held even more weight than he had anticipated. "Lead the way," Poirot said, his voice steady. They made their way down the hallway to the staff's quarters, where the fan had been carefully examined by the estate's servants. Poirot's sharp eyes immediately noticed the subtle shift in the room's atmosphere. The staff, normally quick to gossip, were unusually quiet. The fan was displayed on a wooden table, its edges carefully cleaned and inspected. Hastings gestured toward the fan. "When we examined it, we found a small piece of paper wedged in the fold. It was almost entirely burned, but there's enough left to make something of it." Poirot stepped forward, his fingers tracing the delicate edges of the fan, before carefully reaching for the small scrap of paper. It was charred around the edges, but Poirot's trained eye could still make out a few faint marks. He studied the paper carefully, his mind racing. A name, a date, the faintest outline of something that resembled an address. Poirot's lips parted slightly as the pieces began to fall into place. He had suspected that the fan had been part of an attempt to erase evidence, but this was something else entirely. It was a clue, one that connected directly to Lord Drayton, to his death, and to the person who had tried to destroy it. "Do you see it, Hastings?" Poirot said quietly. "This is not just a piece of evidence, it is the very thing someone wanted to keep hidden. This piece of paper is the link between Drayton's murder and the people in this house." Hastings looked over Poirot's shoulder, his eyes widening as he saw the marks on the paper. "But what does it mean? What are we looking at?" Poirot leaned closer, his finger hovering over the faint marks. "I believe this is an address," he murmured, his voice tinged with certainty. "And I believe it leads us directly to the person responsible for Drayton's death." Hastings took a step back, his face paling. "Do you mean to say that this clue leads us to one of the guests here? Someone among us?" Poirot nodded slowly, his eyes still fixed on the fragment of paper. "Indeed, mon ami. One of them is hiding more than just a motive. They are hiding the truth, but this clue will expose them." The room was silent for a moment, the gravity of Poirot's words hanging in the air. Hastings finally spoke, his voice low. "So what do we do now?" Poirot straightened, his expression returning to its usual calm composure. "Now, we follow the clue. We visit the address it leads us to, and we see what it reveals." Hastings nodded, though his face was still clouded with doubt. "And if it's another dead end?" Poirot's gaze sharpened, his confidence unwavering. "Then we will follow the next one, and the next. The truth is rarely found all at once, but it always leaves traces. And once we know what we're looking for, we will find it." The two of them turned to leave the room, but Poirot hesitated for a moment, casting a final glance at the fan. He had always prided himself on his ability to read people, to understand the smallest of details that others missed. But even he had to admit that this case was proving to be a challenge, a web of lies, and deceit so intricate that it threatened to trap him at every turn. Still, he knew one thing with absolute certainty: the killer was close, and this clue was the first real lead he had. It was time to act. Chapter 11. Tensions rise. Poirot and Hastings walked briskly through the long corridors of Montrose estate, their footsteps echoing off the marble floors. The discovery of the fan's hidden clue had shifted the investigation into a new gear. The piece of paper was small, inconspicuous, but it was undeniably a link, the key that could unlock the mystery. Poirot's mind, ever the instrument of precision, began to piece together the puzzle with a renewed sense of urgency. The moment had arrived for the final push. The truth, elusive as it was, would soon be uncovered. But Poirot knew that the suspects would not make it easy. They were all skilled in their own ways of deception, each hiding something that kept them from revealing the full story. Yet, the clue from the fan would now force their hands. "Do you know what this means, Hastings?" Poirot asked as they reached the study door. Hastings, following close behind, replied with a shake of his head. "I'm not sure." "What does it mean?" Poirot opened the door, his sharp eyes taking in every detail of the room as he stepped inside. "It means," he said, his voice low but filled with purpose, "that one of the people in this room is closer to Drayton's death than they are letting on. They have been lying to us all along." Hastings glanced at Poirot, his face creased with worry. "So, you think one of them knows more than they're saying?" Poirot nodded, his gaze already fixed on the papers in front of him. "Oh, they know, my friend. They know far more than they let on. And now it's time to confront them." Poirot's sharp eyes scanned the room. He had already called the three suspects into the study, and the time for polite questioning was over. The investigation had reached its critical juncture. The clues were in place, and the suspects were starting to unravel under the pressure. Poirot could feel it in the air. Lady Evelyn, Wren, and Miss Frost entered one by one, each taking their place in the study. They exchanged wary glances, none willing to speak first. They were all well aware of Poirot's skill with words, his ability to expose secrets that were meant to stay hidden. Now, with the truth within his grasp, Poirot would not allow them to escape. He turned to Lady Evelyn first. "Madam," he began, his voice measured and firm, "I must ask you to tell me everything. The truth. No more half answers, no more evasions. What were you hiding from us? What connection do you have to Lord Drayton's death?" Lady Evelyn stiffened, her fingers twitching nervously at her side. She had always been the calmest of the three, but Poirot had known from the beginning that there was something under the surface. Her hesitation now only confirmed his suspicions. "I told you," she said slowly, her voice quiet but resolute. "I had nothing to do with Lord Drayton's death." Poirot's gaze hardened. "But you did, madam. You had a connection to him that none of us have been told about. I know that much. The question is, what are you afraid of?" She faltered for just a moment, a brief flicker of something in her eyes, before she quickly masked it with a composed expression. "I don't know what you mean," she replied, but there was an edge of desperation in her voice now. Poirot turned to Wren, his gaze piercing. "Monsieur Wren," he said, his tone shifting slightly, "I've been thinking about your business dealings with Drayton, but I believe there is more to it than that. I believe you had a personal stake in what happened to him. Tell me, what were you really after? What did you want from Lord Drayton?" Wren shifted uncomfortably in his chair. His usual confidence seemed to be slipping, though he did his best to maintain an air of nonchalance. "I told you already," he said firmly. "It was business. Nothing more." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Business, monsieur, or something more? You are lying to me, Wren. I know it. The truth will come out soon, whether you speak it or not." Wren opened his mouth as if to retort, but nothing came out. Poirot could see the cracks in his facade, the fear flickering behind his calculated demeanor. Wren knew that his time was running out. Finally, Poirot turned to Miss Frost, who had been unnervingly quiet during the exchange. She had been watching him, her eyes sharp with suspicion, but also with a faint trace of uncertainty. "Miss Frost," Poirot said softly, his voice carrying an almost hypnotic calm, "I have one final question for you. What did you really mean when you said Lord Drayton was just a patron to you? That is a lie, isn't it?" Miss Frost didn't flinch. Her gaze remained steady, but Poirot could tell that her mind was racing. "No, Monsieur Poirot," she replied, her voice smooth, but there was an undertone of tension beneath her words. "You are mistaken. Drayton was nothing more than a patron to me. That's all." Poirot studied her for a long moment. "I don't believe you," he said finally, his voice low. "You knew Drayton far better than you let on, and you are hiding something. Perhaps you were even closer to him than the rest of us realize. But I will find out what you're concealing, and soon all of your secrets will be revealed." The room fell silent. The suspects had nowhere left to hide. Poirot's mind was turning faster than ever, piecing together the connections, the subtle lies, and the half-truths. The web was tightening, and the final pieces of the puzzle were coming into focus. "Do not worry," Poirot said with a slight smile. "Soon everything will be clear." Chapter 12. The confrontation. Tension in the study was thick. Each suspect now fully aware that their secrets were slipping through their fingers. Poirot's deliberate pacing in front of them gave the impression of a man who was confident in his conclusions, but not yet ready to expose them. He was playing his cards carefully, and they were all beginning to feel the weight of his scrutiny. Lady Evelyn, Jasper Wren, and Miss Vivian Frost sat silently, their faces tight with anxiety. The questions had been asked, and Poirot had set the stage for what was to come. Now, the time had arrived for the inevitable confrontation. Poirot stopped in front of the guests, his gaze sweeping over each of them with methodical precision. "You all know that I am not one to rush to conclusions," he said, his voice calm, almost detached. "I prefer to observe, to listen, and to let the truth come to me." Piece by piece, he glanced at each of them again, allowing the weight of his words to settle in. "I have seen the cracks in your stories." Poirot continued, "Lady Evelyn, you claimed that there was nothing between you and Lord Drayton, but your actions betray you. Monsieur Wren, you insist that your relationship with Drayton was purely business. But I know better. And Miss Frost, you have hidden behind your art, but now the truth is knocking at your door." Poirot took a deep breath, his hands clasped behind his back. "But it is time, my friends, to stop pretending. The truth cannot remain buried forever." He turned toward Lady Evelyn first, his sharp eyes locking onto hers. "Madam, you have been the most composed, the most elegant of all, but you have something to hide, something that links you to Lord Drayton's death." Lady Evelyn's lips tightened, but she did not speak. Poirot could feel the tension radiating from her, her every movement calculated. She was trying to keep her composure, but the walls were beginning to crumble. "You see, madam," Poirot continued, "it is not just your relationship with Lord Drayton that interests me. It is the one thing that connects all of you, the one thing that binds you together. You were not just a social acquaintance, were you? There was something more, something darker." Lady Evelyn's eyes narrowed, but she remained silent. Poirot moved on, turning his gaze to Wren. "And you, Monsieur Wren," he said, his voice colder now. "You have spent your life building walls, constructing facades. But in this room, those walls have begun to collapse. You claim that your dealings with Drayton were purely financial, but the truth is far more complicated. What was the real reason you needed Drayton out of the way?" Wren shifted in his chair, his eyes darting to the door, then back to Poirot. "I've told you everything. There was no personal vendetta, no hidden motive. It was all about business," he said, his voice shaking slightly. Poirot stepped closer, his face now inches from Wren's. "You can lie to yourself, Monsieur Wren, but I know better. The pressure of money, the pressure of secrets, this drove you to do something far more drastic. But you won't admit it yet, will you?" Wren swallowed hard, but no answer came. Poirot turned his attention to Miss Frost, his gaze softening ever so slightly. "Miss Frost," he said gently, "you are not as invulnerable as you would like us to believe. Your art, your aloofness, these are but shields, shields to protect you from the truth. You were closer to Lord Drayton than you have let on, were you not?" Miss Frost's lips parted as if to respond, but no words came. She stared at Poirot, her face an unreadable mask, before she finally spoke. "I don't know what you mean," she said, her voice tight, her breath shallow. Poirot nodded slowly, as though he already knew the answer. "You know exactly what I mean, Miss Frost. You and Drayton were not simply business partners, were you? You had something more, an understanding, perhaps, or a secret. But it is not just about you and Drayton. There's a larger story here, a story that involves all of you." The silence in the room was deafening, the air thick with the weight of Poirot's words. The three suspects were trapped in their own lies, each of them knowing that Poirot was closing in on them, piece by piece. But still, none of them spoke. They were waiting, hoping for a crack in Poirot's methodical questioning, a moment of weakness. Poirot smiled to himself, recognizing the pattern. It was always the same. The suspects knew they were on the brink of exposure, but their pride and arrogance kept them silent. They all believed they could outsmart him, but they were wrong. In the end, Poirot would always find the truth. "Do you understand what I am saying?" Poirot asked, his voice low but firm. "The truth is not in the words you speak. It is in the lies you tell. And I will find those lies, no matter how well you hide them." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "I know that one of you killed Lord Drayton. But the question, my friends, is not who. The question is why. What was it that drove one of you to take his life? Lady Evelyn, Wren, and Miss Frost all exchanged brief, nervous glances. The walls were closing in. Their defenses were crumbling. They could no longer hide behind their facades. Poirot took a final step back, his eyes scanning the three suspects. "The time for secrets is over," he said, his voice cold. "And soon, very soon, you will have no choice but to tell me everything." Chapter 13. A desperate attempt to escape. The weight of Poirot's words hung in the air, like a suffocating fog. The silence that followed his confrontation was pregnant with unspoken thoughts, each suspect weighed down by the pressure of their own guilt and fear. Poirot's sharp eyes scanned the room, noting the subtle shifts in their posture, the slight tremors in their hands. Each of them was on edge, their deflections no longer convincing, their walls crumbling under the force of Poirot's methodical questioning. Lady Evelyn was the first to speak, her voice cracking under the strain. "I've told you everything. There's nothing more to say." Her defiant words were met with Poirot's unyielding gaze. "Madam, you have told me only what you wanted me to hear. But I know there is more. You are hiding something, and I will uncover it." Wren shifted in his chair, his normally calm demeanor beginning to fracture. "This is madness, Poirot," he said, his voice a little strained. "You're accusing us all, one by one, without any evidence. How can you be sure?" Poirot's expression remained calm, but his eyes flickered with the sharpness of a hawk. "Monsieur Wren, your unease betrays you. You have been playing the game, keeping your cards close to your chest. But you have made one fatal mistake underestimating me." A sudden movement caught Poirot's attention. Miss Frost, who had remained eerily silent for most of the conversation, now stood up abruptly. Her face, usually composed and distant, was twisted with something that looked like panic. She paced toward the door, her movements quick and erratic. "Where are you going, Miss Frost?" Poirot asked, his voice laced with an underlying threat. "Do you think you can walk away from this? From the truth?" Frost's eyes darted toward the door, her fingers gripping the handle, but before she could turn it, Poirot was in front of her, blocking her path. She froze, her body trembling with a mix of frustration and fear. "I cannot stay here, Poirot," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You don't understand. This is not how it was supposed to be. I never wanted any of this." Poirot tilted his head, his gaze piercing. "What do you mean, Miss Frost? Tell me, now, what has driven you to this point? What are you so desperate to hide?" For a moment, Miss Frost said nothing, her breath shallow, her hands trembling. Poirot could see the conflict in her eyes, the internal struggle between revealing the truth and maintaining the mask of indifference she had so carefully constructed. Finally, her shoulders slumped in resignation, and she backed away from the door, collapsing into a nearby chair. I never meant for things to go this far," she admitted, her voice cracking. "Lord Drayton and we had a relationship. It wasn't just professional. He had power, and I was drawn to it. I thought I could control it. I thought I could use him for my own ends." Lady Evelyn gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, while Wren remained silent, his eyes darting between Miss Frost and Poirot. Poirot's gaze softened slightly, but he did not let up. "And what of the murder, Miss Frost? What role did you play in it?" Frost looked at Poirot, her eyes brimming with guilt. "I didn't kill him," she said, almost pleading. "But I didn't stop it either. I knew things were getting out of hand. Lord Drayton had his secrets. I knew he was involved with shady people, dangerous people. But I didn't realize the danger until it was too late. He promised me things that never came to pass. And then someone else came into the picture, someone who wanted him gone. I didn't know who it was at first, but I knew something bad was coming." Poirot leaned forward, his voice steady but firm. "Who was it, Miss Frost? Who wanted him dead?" Miss Frost shook her head, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "I never asked. I was too afraid. I just wanted to escape, and I thought that if I kept my distance, I could avoid getting caught up in it. But when I heard about his death, I realized that I had already been involved. By doing nothing, I had allowed it to happen." Poirot studied her for a long moment before speaking again, his voice filled with quiet intensity. "You were complicit, Miss Frost. You knew something was wrong, and you chose to turn a blind eye. And that, in itself, is a crime." She recoiled slightly, as though his words had physically struck her. "I never intended for anyone to die," she said, her voice breaking. "I never wanted this." Poirot took a deep breath, his mind racing as the pieces began to fall into place. Miss Frost had been caught in a web of deceit, too afraid to confront the truth until it was too late. But her admission, though incomplete, had provided him with the critical clue he had been seeking. There was someone else involved, someone who had orchestrated Drayton's death. But who? Before Poirot could speak again, there was a loud noise from down the hall, the unmistakable sound of hurried footsteps. Wren stood up suddenly, his face pale. "What now?" he asked, his voice shaking. What more could possibly happen? Poirot's eyes narrowed as he turned toward the door. "Stay here," he said to the others. "I will see what this is." As he made his way down the hallway, Poirot could feel the tension in the air rise once again. The game had shifted. The web was tightening. And soon, the identity of the true murderer would be revealed whether they were ready or not. Chapter 14. The final piece falls into place. Poirot stepped swiftly down the hallway, his mind racing with the revelations he had just uncovered. Miss Frost's confession, though filled with fear and hesitation, had given him a glimpse into the intricate web that bound the guests of Montrose estate. The truth was beginning to take shape, but there was still one last piece of the puzzle to uncover. As he approached the source of the noise coming from the servants' quarters, Poirot's instincts heightened. The footsteps had quickened, then stopped altogether, as if someone had sensed his presence and hesitated. Poirot slowed his pace, his sharp eyes scanning the surroundings. Every movement, every sound in the estate carried weight. He knew that what awaited him around the corner could either confirm his suspicions or send him down a different path. He rounded the corner, and there, in the dim light of the hallway, stood Lady Evelyn. Her eyes widened at the sight of Poirot, and for a fleeting moment, Poirot saw a mixture of fear and something darker flash across her features. She was no longer the composed, aristocratic figure she had been earlier. This was someone who had been caught off guard, perhaps by the gravity of the situation, or by the relentless persistence of Poirot's investigation. "Madam," Poirot said quietly, his voice calm but filled with an intensity that made the air seem heavier. "What are you doing here?" Lady Evelyn hesitated, her hands tightly clasped in front of her. I was just going to speak with the staff," she said, her voice unsteady. To ensure that everything was in order, Poirot took a step forward, his gaze never leaving hers. "Is that so? You are certain you have no other reasons for being here, madam? No other motivations for seeking out this place?" Lady Evelyn's breath caught, and for a moment, she looked as though she might speak, might reveal what she was really hiding. But then she straightened up, her expression hardening. "I told you, Poirot, I had nothing to do with Drayton's death, and if you continue with these accusations, I will—" "Enough," Poirot interrupted, his voice firm. "There is no need to deny what is already clear. The truth has a way of revealing itself, no matter how hard we try to bury it." He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle in the air between them. Lady Evelyn's eyes flickered briefly toward the door, as though she were contemplating making a run for it, but Poirot was already in front of her, blocking her path. "You have been lying to me, madam," Poirot continued, his voice cutting through the silence like a knife. "Not just about Lord Drayton, but about yourself. You knew more than you have let on, and now you must face the consequences of your silence." Lady Evelyn's gaze shifted from Poirot's eyes to the floor, and her fingers tightened around the fabric of her dress. "I didn't want this," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I never meant for it to go this far. But I couldn't stop it. I couldn't stop him." Poirot's brow furrowed slightly, but he remained silent, waiting for her to continue. Slowly, Lady Evelyn's shoulders slumped, as though the weight of the confession had become too much to bear. "I was in love with him," she said softly, almost to herself. "Lord Drayton. And when I realized that he was planning to leave me for another, I didn't know what to do. He promised me everything, but when I saw him with her, I couldn't bear it." Poirot's expression softened for a moment, though his mind was still racing. This was the missing link, the motive that tied everything together. Lady Evelyn's feelings for Drayton, her jealousy, had clouded her judgment, pushing her to take drastic actions she now regretted. "It was her," Lady Evelyn whispered, her voice barely a breath. "She was the one who made him choose. Miss Frost, she was the one who took him from me. And when I found out, Poirot nodded slowly, piecing together the final details. "You sought revenge," he said, his voice quiet but filled with understanding. "You allowed your emotions to control you, and in your grief, you made the mistake of trusting someone else to handle the situation." Lady Evelyn's face crumpled, her eyes filling with tears. "I never meant for him to die, Poirot. But once it was done, once it had happened, I was too afraid to tell the truth." Poirot sighed, his expression softening as he took a step back. "Madam, you are not alone in this. There are others who are just as complicit. The truth will come, in its time. But you must face it now." Before Lady Evelyn could respond, Poirot turned his attention to the door, where the faint sound of footsteps drew closer. He knew that the others would soon be aware of the confrontation. The investigation had reached its final moments, and now it was time to reveal the truth. Hastings appeared in the hallway, his expression one of concern as he approached Poirot. "Poirot," he said urgently, "we need to hurry. The staff has just reported something strange, something I think you need to see." Poirot nodded, his face already hardening with resolve. "It is time." The final piece has fallen into place, with Lady Evelyn still standing frozen in place. Poirot turned toward the staircase. "Come, Hastings. It is time to confront them all." The truth, he knew, was no longer a distant prospect. It was right before him, and he was prepared to reveal it. No more hiding. No more lies. Chapter 15. The final gathering tension in the room was almost unbearable as Poirot, Hastings, and Lady Evelyn made their way back to the study. The last piece of the puzzle had fallen into place, but the question remained: how would it all unfold now? The confession from Lady Evelyn had given Poirot the final clue he needed, but it was not yet time to reveal everything. There was still one last step to take. As they entered the study, Poirot glanced at the three remaining suspects: Jasper Wren, Miss Vivian Frost, and the servant who had been with them earlier. They were all seated, clearly on edge, but none of them spoke. Poirot noted their discomfort, and for a moment, he allowed himself to relish the silence. "Well, then," Poirot began, his voice breaking the stillness like a bell ringing through a quiet room. "It seems we have come to the final act." He turned toward Lady Evelyn, his gaze softening for a moment. "Madam, you have given me a great deal to think about. But there is more to this story, more than what you alone could reveal. It is time for the others to speak as well." Lady Evelyn said nothing but nodded, her face a study of deep regret and weary acceptance. Poirot turned to Wren first. "Monsieur Wren," Poirot said, his voice unwavering, "you are a man who prides himself on control, on order. You have shown me that, time and again. But it is clear now that you are not as in control as you would like us to believe. The evidence points to one thing: your involvement, your role in the events that led to Lord Drayton's death. Wren shifted in his chair, his fingers running along the edge of the armrest. He was clearly trying to mask the growing anxiety in his chest. Poirot, you have it all wrong. I had no part in Drayton's death. I've been clear about that from the beginning. Poirot smiled thinly. But you see, Monsieur Wren, that is the problem. You have been too clear, too polished in your denials. You speak of business, of numbers, of profits, but you fail to account for the emotions at play, the human motivations. I believe you did not kill Lord Drayton yourself, but you are involved. You are far more involved than you are willing to admit. Wren opened his mouth to protest, but Poirot cut him off. It is not just business, Monsieur Wren. It was never just business. There is something else, something deeper driving your actions. You are connected to this murder, and the truth is closer than you realize. Miss Frost shifted slightly in her seat. Poirot's gaze moved toward her, and the room seemed to grow colder. She had been silent for much of the conversation, but now her eyes were locked on Poirot. Watching him carefully, he could feel the walls she had built around herself, but he knew they were slowly crumbling. Miss Frost, Poirot said, his voice cutting through the quiet, you have been a difficult one to read, but now the pieces are falling into place. You were not just a simple artist, not just a patron of Lord Drayton's estate. You were part of this, a willing participant in the dance that led to his death. Frost's lips pressed together in a tight line, and for a moment, Poirot could see the storm raging beneath her calm exterior. I told you, Poirot, she said, her voice shaking slightly. I didn't want any of this. I didn't want him dead. Poirot's gaze softened. I understand, Miss Frost, but your actions have consequences. You may not have been the one to kill him, but you were complicit. You knew more than you have let on, and your silence has been as damning as any confession. The air in the room felt charged, like an electrical storm about to break. Poirot stood there, his eyes moving from one suspect to the other, seeing the fear in their eyes, the flicker of recognition that they were all trapped. Lady Evelyn, Wren, and Frost had each revealed a piece of the truth, but now it was time to put it all together. It is clear to me, Poirot said, his voice firm, that none of you are innocent. You are all tied to this murder, whether through greed, jealousy, or fear. Lord Drayton's death was not the result of one person's actions, but of the collective choices you all made. Lady Evelyn's eyes filled with tears, but she said nothing. Wren's jaw clenched, his hands gripping the armrests of his chair so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Miss Frost stared at the floor, her face pale. Poirot stepped forward, his tone now resolute. I have seen the truth behind your motives, behind your lies. You are all part of a web, spun by Drayton's secrets, his manipulations. Each of you played a role, and now it is time for the truth to be revealed in full. There was a long pause as Poirot let his words sink in. The room was still, the tension almost unbearable. The suspects sat frozen, unable to speak, their eyes darting between one another. But Poirot could see at the faint glimmer of recognition, the dawning realization that their world was about to collapse. Finally, Poirot took a step back, his eyes moving from Lady Evelyn to Wren, then to Miss Frost. But the question, my friends, he said, his voice softening slightly, is not who did it. It is why. Why did you let it happen? Why did you allow this tragedy to unfold? And that is something only you can answer. The final pieces of the puzzle were now in place. The truth was before them, and soon it would all come crashing down. Poirot could feel that he had them now. The game was over, and the murderer would soon be revealed. Chapter 16. The reveal room seemed to hold its breath as Poirot stood before the suspects. His words had landed, and the weight of them was evident in the faces of Lady Evelyn, Wren, and Miss Frost. There was no more pretense, no more room for evasions. They were trapped in the web of their own making, and Poirot had methodically pulled at the strands, tightening the noose until the truth was within his grasp. Lady Evelyn's eyes glistened with unshed tears, her fingers twitching in her lap as if reaching for something to cling to. Wren's shoulders were hunched, his face ashen, though his expression remained unreadable. Miss Frost, on the other hand, sat motionless, her gaze lowered, her thoughts clearly far away. Poirot could feel the intensity of their silence. They were waiting for him to make his move, to reveal the culmination of his reasoning. He knew they wanted to avoid the confrontation, to keep the delicate threads of their lives intact for just a while longer. But the time for waiting had passed. "The game is over, my friends," Poirot said softly, yet with a finality that could not be ignored. He turned toward Lady Evelyn. "Madam, you have been playing a part in this tragedy from the beginning. Your emotions, your jealousy, your deep connection to Lord Drayton were the seeds of it all." Lady Evelyn's lips parted, but she said nothing. Poirot continued, his voice unwavering. "You were in love with Drayton, weren't you, madam? He promised you everything, but when you found out that he was involved with someone else, someone you could not control, you sought revenge." Lady Evelyn's eyes flickered, a flash of recognition in them as Poirot's words hit their mark. She knew it, just as Poirot did. She had been consumed by her feelings for Drayton, and in her desperation, she had allowed her emotions to dictate her actions. "You killed him, didn't you?" Poirot's voice was quiet now, as though he was stating an undeniable fact. "You were the one who pushed him into the corner, who forced him to make a choice he didn't want to make. But when he chose her, Miss Frost, you couldn't let it go. You couldn't let her have him." Lady Evelyn blinked rapidly, her hands trembling. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but closed it again, unable to form the words. Poirot's gaze softened, but only for a moment. "And you, Monsieur Wren," Poirot said, turning to face the financier, "you had your own motives, did you not? It was not just business that drove you to Drayton. No, it was the deeper things, the secrets he had over you. He had something on you, something that threatened your empire, your reputation." Wren's eyes widened slightly, a brief flash of panic crossing his features before he regained his composure. "I told you," he said in a low voice, "I had nothing to do with Drayton's death." Poirot's lips curled into a knowing smile. "Ah, but Monsieur Wren, it's always the ones who protest the loudest who are hiding the most. Drayton had something over you, something you didn't want anyone to know. You thought you could control him, just as you controlled everything else. But when you realized he was losing his influence, you became desperate." Poirot paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle. "Your desperation led to him being silenced, not by you directly, but by the people you had put in motion." Wren stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. His breath came quickly as he looked at Poirot, his face flushing with indignation. "You don't know what you're talking about, Poirot," he spat. "I had nothing to do with his death." Poirot remained calm, unfazed by Wren's outburst. "Your panic betrays you, monsieur. You can deny it all you want, but you are just as responsible for his death as Lady Evelyn. You allowed your greed and your fear to cloud your judgment, and in doing so, you sealed his fate." Poirot turned his attention to Miss Frost, the final piece of the puzzle. Her composure had remained unbroken throughout the confrontation, but now, as Poirot's gaze fell upon her, a flicker of vulnerability crossed her face. "Miss Frost," Poirot said, his voice now quieter, almost sympathetic, "you were not innocent in all of this. You were Drayton's other woman, the one who he thought he could keep hidden in the shadows. But he was wrong about you, wasn't he? You were the one who had the most to gain when he was gone." Miss Frost's face hardened, her jaw clenching as Poirot spoke. "I didn't kill him," she said flatly, her voice colder than before. "You have no proof. This is all just a game to you, Poirot. You're twisting things to fit your theory." Poirot stepped forward, closing the distance between them. "Ah, but you see, Miss Frost, your actions speak for themselves. Drayton kept you in the background, treating you like a second choice. But when he broke his promise, when he decided to cast you aside for Lady Evelyn, you saw your opportunity. Miss Frost opened her mouth to retort, but Poirot held up a hand. You didn't kill him directly, no, but you played a part. You encouraged the actions that led to his death. You kept the secrets, just as the others did, and now you must face the consequences. The room fell into a heavy silence as the full weight of Poirot's words hit each of them. They had been cornered, their lies exposed. The web was now fully unraveled. Poirot took a deep breath, his gaze moving across the three suspects one last time. The truth is, my friends, you were all complicit in this. You were all part of the scheme that led to Lord Drayton's death, and it is time for you to face what you have done. Lady Evelyn ran, and Miss Frost sat in stunned silence, unable to speak, their guilt written on their faces. Poirot had done it. The mystery had been solved. The final piece had fallen into place. Chapter 17, Outcome and Justice's heavy silence in the room was almost unbearable. The three suspects sat before Poirot, each one seemingly paralyzed by the weight of the truth that had been revealed. Lady Evelyn, once so composed, now appeared small, her face pale, her hands clutching the fabric of her dress with a tremor that betrayed her calm facade. Jasper Wren sat rigidly, his jaw clenched tight, a muscle in his temple twitching ever so slightly. Miss Vivian Frost, the quiet artist, was the last to look up, her gaze distant, as though she were trying to block out the confrontation. Yet there was no escaping it. The game was over. Poirot's voice broke the silence, its authority filling the room. You have all played your parts in this tragedy, he said, his words deliberate, each one landing with the weight of finality. Your motives were clear, your actions unforgivable. Lady Evelyn's lips trembled, but she said nothing. Poirot's eyes softened, but only slightly. He knew that her broken expression told more than words could convey. She had been consumed by jealousy and love, a deadly combination that had clouded her judgment and led her down a dark path. Madam, Poirot continued, you loved Lord Drayton, and when he turned his affection elsewhere, your jealousy consumed you. You could not bear the thought of losing him to someone else, so you sought to destroy him, albeit indirectly. Your grief turned to anger, and anger turned to a willingness to act. Lady Evelyn's shoulders sagged, and she let out a quiet, stifled sob. I never meant for this to happen, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I never meant to kill him. I only wanted him to love me again. Poirot nodded solemnly, as though understanding the depth of her emotions. But the heart does not always guide us to the right path, madam. You allowed yourself to be blinded by your emotions, and in doing so, you lost control. You were the catalyst that set this entire tragedy in motion. Your actions, whether directly or indirectly, led to his death. Lady Evelyn did not respond. Her head bowed lower, as if the weight of Poirot's words had finally broken through the walls she had built around herself. She sat still, her chest heaving with quiet sobs. Poirot turned next to Wren, whose face had become more and more contorted with each word. The man had tried to maintain an air of indifference, but Poirot had seen the cracks, the moment where his carefully constructed mask slipped. Monsieur Wren, Poirot began, his voice carrying the same level of quiet authority. You, too, had a role to play in this. It was not passion that drove you, but fear. Fear of losing control, fear of having your secrets exposed. You were entangled in Lord Drayton's web of power, and when you realized that his death was the only way to preserve your own standing, you became complicit. Wren's face grew pale, his hands gripping the arms of his chair with such intensity that his knuckles turned white. He opened his mouth to speak, but then closed it again, unable to find the words. Your silence speaks volumes, monsieur, Poirot continued, his eyes narrowing. Your fear, your panic, it betrays you. The need to control others, to manipulate them, was always your downfall. And when you saw Drayton's power slipping, you sought to stop him. But you were too late. And now you must face the consequences of your own actions. Wren looked away, his chest rising and falling rapidly. He was no longer the confident, composed man who had entered the investigation. He was a man broken, a man who had been exposed, unable to hide behind his lies any longer. Poirot turned his gaze to Miss Frost, whose stoic expression had not wavered until now. The artist, who had so carefully constructed her aloof persona, was beginning to unravel. Her eyes flickered with something: guilt, fear. Poirot was not sure, but it was there, lurking just beneath the surface. "Miss Frost," Poirot said, his voice softer now, almost sympathetic. "You were perhaps the most difficult of all to understand. You hid behind your art, your aloofness, but you were just as involved in this tragedy as the others. You may not have been the one to strike the final blow, but you were complicit. You allowed Lord Drayton's actions to dictate your own, and in doing so, you sealed his fate." Frost's lips parted, her eyes flickering with something akin to confusion. "I didn't kill him," she said, her voice cracking. "I never wanted him to die, but I couldn't stop it. I was powerless." Poirot took a step closer, his voice dropping to a quiet intensity. "You were not powerless, Miss Frost. You allowed your emotions to control you. You allowed your anger, your sense of betrayal, to cloud your judgment. You made a choice just like the others, and that choice led to Lord Drayton's death." Miss Frost's gaze shifted to the floor, her hands trembling in her lap. She did not deny Poirot's words, for she knew deep down that they were true. She had been just as much a part of it as the others. Her silence and inaction had played a pivotal role in allowing the murder to unfold. Poirot took another step back, looking at all three of them in turn. The room was heavy with the weight of their guilt. The truth had been laid bare, and there was no more room for denial. "The time for lies is over," Poirot said, his voice quiet but firm. "You have all played your parts, whether by action or inaction, and now you must face the consequences." Lady Evelyn, Wren, and Miss Frost remained still, the reality of their actions finally sinking in. The truth had shattered the masks they had so carefully constructed, leaving them exposed, vulnerable. Poirot's gaze softened, just slightly. "Justice will take its course," he said. "But remember this, no one escapes the consequences of their actions. Not in this life, not in any life." Poirot turned and walked toward the door. He paused briefly, glancing back at them one last time. "The case is closed," he said simply, "but the truth will remain with you forever." With that, Poirot exited the room, leaving the suspects to face the fallout of their choices. The truth had been revealed, and justice would follow in due time. Chapter 18. The closing remark. Poirot stood at the threshold of Montrose estate, looking out across the sprawling grounds, now dark and quiet under the cover of night. The case had come to a close, but Poirot's mind, ever sharp, continued to sift through the fragments of the investigation. He had watched the suspects Lady Evelyn, Jasper Wren, and Miss Vivian Frost undergo their unraveling, each of them finally confronting the truth of their actions, though none could find the words to fully redeem themselves. The weight of the case had settled on him as well, but not in the way it might weigh on others. It was not the burden of guilt, nor the weight of knowing that a life had been taken. No, for Poirot, it was the fulfillment of his purpose, finding the truth, no matter how hidden or tangled. It was the satisfaction of seeing the intricate patterns emerge from the chaos of deception, all with one simple, undeniable truth at its core. "Poirot," Hastings's voice called out, breaking his reverie. Poirot turned, and there stood his loyal friend, looking more tired than usual, yet with a glimmer of quiet relief in his eyes. "You've done it, Poirot," Hastings said, his voice warm. "The case is closed. Justice will be done. They will pay for their actions." Poirot nodded slowly, his eyes still fixed on the dark horizon. Yes, mon ami, justice will be served, but it is not my place to exact it. Then I leave to the authorities. My task was simply to find the truth. Hastings walked up beside him, his gaze following Poirot's. It's hard to believe that all of this Lady Evelyn's jealousy, Wren's fear, and Miss Frost's bitterness led to such a tragic end. Poirot gave a quiet smile, though his expression remained thoughtful. Yes, Hastings, it is difficult to comprehend how the human heart can be so clouded by emotion, how it can be led to such extremes. But we are all guilty of it in some form, are we not? The ability to be consumed by what we want, to forget the consequences of our actions. Hastings glanced at him, a deep furrow on his brow. But Poirot, that doesn't excuse their behavior. What they did, what they allowed to happen was wrong. They didn't just make a mistake. They made a choice. Poirot's eyes softened, and for a moment, he allowed the weight of his words to sink in. You are right, Hastings. It was not a mistake. It was a choice to act, or a choice to remain silent. But the truth is, Madame Evelyn, Monsieur Wren, and Miss Frost each carried within them the seeds of this tragedy. They did not plant them all at once, but over time, their actions, their choices brought us here. And in the end, it was the truth that made the difference. Hastings was quiet for a moment, his hands clasped behind his back. And now, what happens now, Poirot? Poirot's gaze flickered toward the horizon, where the first light of dawn was beginning to break. Now, we let the law do its work, he replied. They will be held accountable for what they did. But justice is not just a matter of punishment. It is about understanding, about seeing the truth for what it is, and accepting that truth. Poirot paused, his mind momentarily drifting. Sometimes, Hastings, it is not the punishment that weighs most heavily on a person. It is the knowledge of what they have done, the knowledge that their actions cannot be undone. That is what will haunt them. Hastings nodded, his face thoughtful. I suppose you're right, but will they ever truly understand? Will they ever truly face what they did? Poirot smiled gently, turning to face his friend. That, my dear Hastings, is for them to discover. It is not for me to decide who will find redemption or who will be consumed by guilt. It is a personal journey, one that they must each walk alone. As Poirot spoke, the weight of the investigation seemed to lift from him. The final pieces had fallen into place. The killer had been revealed, the truth uncovered. But it was not just about solving the crime, it was about understanding the human condition, the complexities of the heart and mind, and the choices we make that define us. Hastings let out a sigh, his expression softening. I suppose you've had your fill of this place, Poirot. You're ready to move on to the next case, aren't you? Poirot smiled, his eyes twinkling with that familiar spark of determination. Indeed, Hastings, there are always more mysteries to solve, more truths to uncover. The world is full of puzzles, and it is my duty to find the answers. As the two men stood there, watching the first rays of sunlight spill across the estate, Poirot felt a quiet sense of peace. The case had been difficult, but it was one he could put behind him. And in its place, the knowledge that he had uncovered the truth, no matter how painful it had been, gave him a sense of satisfaction that no verdict could match. Shall we go, Hastings? Poirot asked, his voice calm but firm. Hastings gave a small chuckle. Yes, Poirot, I believe it's time we left this place behind. With one final glance at Montrose estate, Poirot and Hastings walked toward the car that awaited them. The investigation was over, but Poirot knew that the next mystery was always just around the corner, waiting to be solved. And so, with the truth revealed and justice served, they stepped forward into the unknown, ready for whatever the future held. Chapter 19. Epiloguements passed since the events at Montrose estate. Yet for Poirot, the memory of the case lingered like an unsung melody. Lady Evelyn, Wren, and Miss Frost had faced justice, though Poirot knew that the true consequences of their actions would weigh far heavier on their hearts than any sentence could. The quiet of his home, nestled away from the world's demands, provided Poirot the solace he needed. But even in the calm, his mind never rested. He had solved the case, yes, but there was always another mystery waiting in the shadows, another truth to uncover. As Poirot sat at his desk, reviewing letters and contemplating the future, Hastings entered, a smile on his face. "Poirot," he began, "there's another case that needs your attention. Shall we go?" Poirot looked up, his face alight with that familiar spark. "Ah, Hastings, the world is full of mysteries, isn't it? How could we ever tire of finding answers?" With a final glance at the quiet surroundings of his office, Poirot stood, ready to face whatever the next challenge might bring. The pursuit of truth, after all, was a journey without end. And for Hercule Poirot, that was enough.